Good evening, good morning, sorry, or afternoon, depending on your time zone. Welcome to our webinar where we'll be launching our brand new report, Food Delivery and Online Marketplace Platforms in Latin America, and exploration using ranked digital rights standards. I am Belén Roca, Communications Officer at Derechos Digitales, and I will be your host for the next hour. Derechos Digitales is an independent, non-profit, and non-governmental organization whose mission is to defend and promote human rights in the digital environment. Its main areas of work include freedom of expression, access to knowledge, transparency and democracy, and privacy and personal data protection. As you will see, most of these topics are broadly covered in the report, and our panelists will discuss the relevance of the methodology developed by Ranking Digital Rights, RDR, hereinafter, and the findings and recommendations included in the report. This webinar will be recorded, and you can leave comments and questions in the chat box. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists, starting with Leandro. Leandro Ucciferri is a lawyer specialized in technology, policy, and regulation. Since 2021, he is the Global Partnerships Manager at Ranking Digital Rights, where he works with civil society organizations around the world to support corporate accountability research and advocacy initiatives. Before joining RDR, Leandro was a researcher and project officer at the Association for Civil Rights, a nonprofit and independent NGO based in Argentina, where he managed research projects and advocacy campaigns defending the right to privacy in the digital age. Then, Lucía Camacho, our colleague at Derechos Digitales, is a Colombian lawyer specialist on public policy and mastering human rights and democratization. She has worked for over 5 years as a researcher and activist in several Latin American digital rights and traditional human rights NGOs. And finally, Pedro Mizukami is a lawyer and independent researcher based in Rio de Janeiro, co-author of the Brazilian chapters of Media Piracy in Emerging Economies and Shadow Libraries, both edited by Joe Caraganis, and the Mapping Digital Media Brazil report. So, Leandro, will we start with you? Can you tell us more about the value of RDR methodology for assessing platforms and big tech's performance in human rights and its impact in the industry or human rights ecosystem?
Thanks, Belén, and thanks, Derechos Digitales, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and really excited about the launch of this report. First of all, let me tell you a bit about RDR. I'll start there, and to answer the question, I want to talk about key 4 points that define RDR, our track record, and how we're looking ahead. So during the past decade, RDR has built the foundations to hold tech power accountable, using international human rights standards as the North Star to demand transparency from the most powerful digital platforms and telecommunications companies around the world. So my first point is about setting the gold standard for human rights when it comes to technology companies, and especially big tech. So since 2013, we've been developing and improving a research methodology that measures how well tech companies respect key human rights issues, especially in the areas of corporate governance, privacy, freedom of expression, and information. RDR provided a new way of thinking about human rights in the digital age, creating a framework that can help us track how companies change and improve their policies and practices over time. One of the key benefits of the research methodology is how granular it is. So in the latest version that we have, which was updated in 2020, there are 58 indicators that compose the methodology, and each indicator has its own set of questions, which we call elements, which are essentially the specific questions that are used to assess the companies on more than 300 specific questions that touch on these human rights issues. This granularity is what helps us paint very detailed pictures about the companies themselves, and not only their policies, but also how they change over time, as I said. One aspect about our work is that there's really no black box, quote unquote, because from the outset, RDR's standards and methods were developed with transparency and openness at its core. And that's by design, because we want companies to understand how they're being evaluated and on what grounds, and because we also want ourselves to be held accountable for what we put out there, and for anyone to really understand the reasoning behind the results and behind the scores and so on. And more importantly, for the conversation that we're having today, is because from the beginning, we wanted anyone to be able to use the methodology, so that really any researcher, be it independently or through an organization, can replicate the research workflow, learn and adapt from it to their own individual use cases. And we'll come back to this in a bit. My second point is about raising the baseline for human rights and creating a race to the top. Our understanding is that transparency is only the first step to achieve accountability. And really, our work revolves around pushing companies to engage with us and compelling them to respond with improved policies and practices, but also raising the bar about what is expected of companies when it comes to respecting human rights in technology and online. Since the first RDR Corporate Accountability Index in 2015, companies have become increasingly more responsive, both to the results of the evaluations, but also to our requests for feedback and engagement in the research process. In the last research cycle in 2022, only 4 out of 26 companies, which we rank in total, decided not to engage. So it is a pretty good ratio. And increasingly, we're seeing that companies talk about their results publicly and mention their results in our rankings. For example, Microsoft, Telefonica, Kakao, MTN, and previously Twitter, before what happened. In the latest edition of our Big Tech scorecard, almost all companies made specific improvements, as well as in our telco giant scorecard. And some companies like Telefonica in Spain and MTN in South Africa have even used our standards as a roadmap to develop new policies and transparency resources. But I think the impact of the methodology and how we've been evaluating companies and ranking them and scoring them go beyond these 26 companies that we study ourselves, because the competitors of these companies are also starting to take notice, and even they want to be part of the evaluations. And we have received requests or even comments about how they want to be part of the rankings and how they want to be scrutinized, because they want to show how much better they perform compared to their peers. And that is also one of the benefits and one of the aspects about doing this work, leveraging that competitiveness so that everyone can improve and really raise the bar, as I said. My third point is about our work with investors, which has become especially relevant in recent years, as members of the investor community are increasingly embracing both environmental, social, and governance metrics and data. And investors are increasingly engaging in advocacy and activism within the avenues that they have internally with the companies. And they have recognized the usefulness and the utility of independent human rights benchmarks, as opposed to risk ratings, because they have turned to human rights benchmarks like RDR to support their analyses, and really to use insights to help them in discussions and arguments to push for change within the company's structures. In that area, we have partnered with organizations like the Investor Alliance for Human Rights, the Emerging Markets Investor Alliance, and we're really happy to work with them, providing them insights and data so that they can push for these changes internally, for example, through shareholder resolutions. And I mentioned that it's important that independent human rights benchmarks focus on engaging with investors, because in the ESG risk ratings ecosystem, there's a myriad of issues that stem from how these ratings are developed and how companies, especially tech companies, are painted in performing around human rights. Usually in this ecosystem, the ratings measure the risk that the world poses to the company and its shareholders, but not the company's real impact on the world. So basically, they are fundamentally designed to protect profits and not people. And the ESG agencies behind these type of studies do not inherently view the obligation to respect human rights as financially relevant, unless there is a human rights issue exposed, to the company, and resulting in maybe financial or reputational damage through investigations, fines, or other kind of issues. And the data that's coming out of this ecosystem is teamed with problems like scores, inconsistent scores across the specific studies that are carried out. So different providers result in different scores. So there's no cohesion about how a company performs over time and on the same specific set of metrics or indicators, often because there's really low public facing transparency, right, in terms of how the scores are calculated, how the methodologies are used, and even what are the methodologies used, and also conflict of interest between companies and the producers of these type of studies. So I wanted to emphasize this because this is where non-profit human rights benchmarks like RDR really have an important role to fill, because we want to achieve impact by measuring the risk that companies pose to individuals and society, not just the bottom line and profits. And as I said before, built on values around openness and transparency. And finally, my last point is about building a global movement and democratizing corporate accountability. And it's tied especially to this last point about the role that benchmarks like RDR fills into this ecosystem. As I mentioned, RDR's methodology was designed to be open so that anyone can use it, can learn from it, can adapt it to their own needs. And even though we focus on the biggest and most powerful companies, digital platforms and telcos around the world, that they have really vast user bases, really vast geographies, but at the end of the day, there are only 26 companies. So we cannot do this work alone. Since the release of the first RDR index, organizations around the world have used the methodology to study local companies and adapt it to their needs, but they had to do it alone or with very little support. And since I've joined in 2021, we've been able to ramp up those efforts to provide direct technical assistance to organizations and independent researchers that want to adapt the methodology to their local context. And I'm really happy to say that throughout these 3 years, we've been able to collaborate and produce 18 research projects, which altogether have evaluated more than 120 companies, local and regional, in all major continents around the world, and specifically targeting 37 countries. So I'm really happy about the conversation that we'll be having today. In Latin America, this is the first report of its kind and the first use of the methodology in its kind in the region. And it really speaks to one of our main goals about contributing to expanding scrutiny beyond the Silicon Valley and Brussels bubbles. We really want to help grow the community that can hold technology power accountable in whatever form it comes. Not only big tech platforms or the most popular social media platforms that are used at any given point in time, but rather going to the specific tech companies that on a daily basis have repercussions in how everyone lives their lives. And finally, we understand that there's a learning curve to using our methods and standards. So we have also focused in these past years to develop resources and mechanisms to really boost civil society's capacity. And we've developed a set of resources that anyone can access on our website, and I wanted to invite everyone to take a look and use them. And I remain, of course, available for any insights and feedback needed to engage in your project. You can look up our RDR Research Lab and Scorecard Toolkit and Knowledge Center. All of those resources on our website will help you really kickstart your own adaptation using our methods and standards, and engage with this type of work that you'll hear more about today. So yeah, looking forward to the rest of the panelists, and I really look forward to hearing about the results of the research.
Thank you, Leandro, for your revision of what's about RDR standards. Its relevance for what we do. So, Lucia, can you tell us more about the report and its main goal? Which countries were covered? Which platforms? Key findings? More about it.
Okay. Thank you, Belén. I would like to share my screen. Is it possible? Okay. Let me see. Okay, tell me when I have that option available. Because trying to, but okay. Okay, thank you, Leandro. I don't know if with my personal email, because with my email from Derechos Digitales didn't allow me to. Okay, now I can do it. Okay, great. I think you all might be seeing my screen. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can.
So, thank you, Leandro, Belén, Vladimir, Pedro, the author of this report, and you all for being here, and Leandro for the introduction and for giving us this general overview of RDR's valuable work. Now, I would like to briefly present to you all some of the relevant aspects of our report, remembering that it is also available on our website. And to do this, I would like to organize this presentation into 3 sections. The first one dedicated to discussing what we did and how we did it. The second part, where I will present the research main findings. And finally, to briefly comment on some of the recommendations that you can read all at the end of the more extensive report. So, let's go. Well, what we did and how we did it. Well, in this research, we wanted to evaluate the human rights commitments of 2 business models, marketplaces and food delivery apps. To do this, we chose some of the most representative ones that were based or deploying in Latin America, for which we selected a total of 9 companies. I would like to point out that our selection includes Yummy, as you may see in this slide, formerly known as Jago, but we decided to exclude it from the overall ranking just because it had the worst performance of all the companies in the group, with an average score of only 5 points in general. So we decided to focus our attention on Mercado Libre, AliExpress, and Shopee as marketplaces and delivery food apps, such as Rappi, DiDi Food, aiqfome, based in Brazil, PedidosYa, and iFood. As you can imagine from this list, some of these companies have expanded ambitiously, while others have moved to different regional geographical locations, and some of them have change of name, as was the case of Yummy, for example, and most of them have adapted to the existing competition in the region. Now, we are aware that this research has a focus on Latin America, but we only could focus on 4 countries that are not representative of the diversity and complexity of our region. But we wanted to pay attention mainly to what was happening in Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, and Ecuador. For example, we know in our group of countries, some of them have more robust data protection laws than others, and countries like Bolivia, for example, don't even have a framework in this area. But we believe that this diversity within a small group of countries offers insight, lessons, and experiences about the emerging issues in mass or global business models. Now, we decided to adopt the RDR methodology because it offers a diverse set of robust human rights-based indicators. As Leandro pointed out, this is like a gold standard, right? That have been tested to closely assess the commitments of big tech and other type of businesses. Originally, there are 58 indicators, but we chose to review and select only 24 of them that were representative of the foundational concerns that we wanted to study, at least in this first report, in this first study. So this study is, in any case, a first approach of the performance of marketplace and food delivery apps in our region. Now, I've talked about indicators. These indicators cover mainly three areas. The corporate governance axis, which explores the degree of internal transparency of the companies, as well as internal bodies responsible for ensuring that business practices do align with companies' policies, right? The second axis of indicators are those of freedom of expression and access to information, which examines the level of transparency of companies when informing their users about their own policies, especially regarding to the management of content and accounts that violate the company's own terms and conditions, as well as how they manage third-party requests to remove such content or accounts. Just a quick note for those wondering if food delivery companies should even have content management rules, as discussions about content moderation commonly revolve around other types of platforms and not necessarily these. We believe that even though they may not be part of the dominant discussion, as food delivery app allows users to generate content such as restaurant reviews or internal messages exchanged between platform and users, such content should indeed have clear rules in terms of and conditions, just as it will be with another platform that allows user-generated content. We believe this is the first time in our region that a study of this kind is asking these sort of questions about food delivery platforms operations. And lastly, the privacy axis, the privacy indicators, they were the most robust of all, incorporating questions about privacy ranging from basic aspects to more complex ones. For example, it asks if companies have clear data protection policies, and if they inform the users about the inference they draw from their personal data, or if they inform the users about sharing of the data with a third party, including their businesses, partners, and of course, governments. To conclude with this session, I would like to mention that the application of this methodology looks something like this. We assign a score based on how well the policy that was reviewed complied with the criteria set by each indicator. And I would like to note that we reviewed policies published only up to December 2022 and focused our analysis on the content of the policy rather than whether the companies actually comply with them in the practice or not. So what did we find? Overall, we found that marketplaces outperform in all three evaluation axes compared to food delivery apps. However, it is important to know that better performance does not necessarily mean they receive the higher scores. As you can see in the image, the scores are significantly low, right? And no company comes close to a 50% or higher performance. Not even the largest or globally reaching companies like AliExpress or Shopee, whose parent company is Limited, based in Singapore. In general, all companies need to strengthen transparency in their policies. We believe that transparency is key, not only to inform what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and how they monitor that their actions do align with their stated objectives. In the overall assessment, we also observed that all companies are increasingly interested in data, partly due to the narrative of turning each application or business into a super app, offering multiple services beyond their original core business model. Therefore, we believe that the continued aggregation of services and the growing collection of and processing of data from various sources should draw attention to these actors in the platform regulation discussion. Now, in the corporate governance indicators, the Brazilian-based food delivery app aiqfome had the best performance compared to the rest. It was an outlier, mainly due to its acquisition by the corporate conglomerate Magazine Luiza, which enhanced its compliance and human rights commitments of this app. DiDi Food and Rappi are at the bottom of the rankings, as you can see in this slide, with both companies lacking transparency in their internal governance and human rights commitments, like at the very basic level. This lack of transparency makes them to other indicators related to privacy and freedom of expression and information, but all fail to provide policies regarding internal bodies in charge of policy oversight. Now, in the freedom of expression and access to information indicators, we found that Mercado Libre had the best score. Mercado Libre leads in this category, performing well in most indicators related to this area. But while its performance is good, it's not particularly outstanding. As you may see, it has only a 24% of good score or good rating. The company's strength in this area is attributed mostly to its transparency report and the clear, understandable, and accessible nature of its term of services. We can see now too that AliExpress and Shopee provide fully or partially info about type of content or activities they do not allow in their platform or app, but we continue to see that improvements in transparency are needed across the assessed companies. And privacy. Overall, this group of companies, Mercado Libre, AliExpress, Shopee, and aiqfome, demonstrate a higher level of transparency in their privacy-related practices compared to the others that were evaluated. But Mercado Libre stood out by providing partial information on due diligence applied to government requests for user data and the partial commitment to resist inappropriate government demands in this regard. We found too that Mercado Libre provide information that none of the rest provide, like, for example, the number of requests they receive for user information, the process they apply to reply to those requests, amongst others. What do we recommend? Now, we believe that this approach provide numerous findings that will undoubtedly enrich the platform regulation discussion. It will also bring attention to other issues that food delivery platforms often deserve, especially in terms of gig workers, right? But a comparative exercise of this kind is demanding, as Pedro and Mayra, that were the researchers in the study, may know. And this report left us with the overall impression that all companies are in need of greater transparency. As Leandro pointed out, transparency is the first step to achieve accountability, and we do believe the same. Transparency, as we may know, is an instrumental tool for the exercise of other rights such as freedom of expression and privacy. And finally, in our recommendations, we try to aim at three main actors, companies, states, and civil society. For companies, we believe it is essential to disclose their efforts to protect, respect, and address potential infringements on user rights resulting from their business operations. They should also provide full information about their internal procedures to address such incidents. And we hope that in the future, they can offer more comprehensive reports on the application of their policies, as well as more detailed and clear policies that relate to third parties and governments. To state, we believe that they should proactively scrutinize the policies and practices of both marketplaces and food delivery apps to ensure their alignment with human rights. And they should also proactively report when possible, of course, requests for user data and the removal of content and accounts, among other matters. We understand, of course, that the capabilities of authorities in each country may vary, but this report seeks to inform the actions of public authorities regarding these two business models that were analyzed. And for civil society and users, of course, we believe that they can enrich their work in the future by using the findings that were presented here and to enrich their advocacy and monitoring efforts. It's worth exploring the performance of other local platforms using the RDR methodology that, as Leandro pointed out, is a gold standard today. And applying this methodology may provide a roadmap for examining companies' commitments to human rights. That's it, and I would like to invite you all to review the report that is already available on our website.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for your presentation. I would like to remind you, our public, that you can make questions and comments on our chat box and the Q&A tool available on Zoom. And please, Pedro, if you would tell us more about the report that you wrote, because you're the author of it. I'm going to ask 2 questions to guide the conversation, but you can talk about whatever you want, whatever is coming in this conversation. So the first one is, what were 3 of the main challenges you encountered while crafting the report in terms of transparency of the info available or its accessibility?
Oh, hi everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here after. I mean, this has been a long time coming, this report, and I'm really happy to be here speaking with you. And I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot in terms of the difficulties that we found. I can start by saying that, I mean, like, all companies that are not transparent are really dissimilar in how they are untransparent and how the challenges that they provided to us. So to sum it up, I mean, there are challenges that were very specific to a couple of companies. There were challenges that affected all of them. But if I have to summarize, well, marketplaces have performed better because due to the nature of their activity, there are certainly a more visible target for certain types of pressure, for instance, intellectual property rights. This is a big issue for marketplaces, and they are pushed to provide more data. The Mercado Libre transparency report is mostly due to pressures that they have received from the intellectual property rights sector. So they had issues in Brazil with pirated material being available digital, this copyrighted material. So they do not allow, for instance, the sale of online courses or ebooks. But they also have been pushed to have a transparency report so that they could point to numbers that would reveal that they are doing something. So one of the reasons that Mercado Libre performed better was because of that report, but that report is lacking in several really relevant aspects because it's mostly due to that kind of pressure. But so then, due to the nature of their activity, marketplaces have more stuff. They have more exposure to pressure from a lot of different sectors. If you're selling stuff online, there are regulations that have to be followed for specific items such as firearms, for instance. And so there's more that the surface area for pressure is larger. But that's another issue that we found. Marketplaces also tend to be publicly traded, so that also puts in more obligations in terms of disclosure. So that's also one of the reasons that they have performed better. So we had more material to work with marketplaces and with publicly traded companies. None of the food service apps that we have analyzed are publicly traded, but the companies that own them are, in two cases, which was Prosus, which is a Dutch investment management company that is traded in the Netherlands, that owns Movilet, which is another investment management company that is a Brazilian company, but it's owned mostly by Prosus. And iFood is owned by Movilet. So if you think of a Russian doll, so there's Prosus, then there is Movilet, and then there is iFood right at the bottom. So we evaluated iFood itself because Prosus, due to the nature of their activities as an investment management company, they have a portfolio. They are kind of like an investment fund, but they are more long-term. But they have a human rights statement that they sort of throw the responsibility for governance policy and documents to their portfolio companies. So they kind of wash their hands in a way. So we evaluated iFood. In the case of PedidosYa is owned by Delivery Hero, which only owns food delivery companies. So we just evaluated Delivery Hero, and Delivery Hero performed well in governance, just like aiqfome, which is owned by Magazine Luiza, another company, but different than both Prosus and Delivery Hero, because Magazine Luiza is a retail company that started in the 50s in Brazil and then expanded and then made a transition to the digital space and sort of started a shopping spree and acquired several companies. And this is part of a quote unquote super app strategy, which is a very specific model that was developed in China. And it's kind of a buzzword right now. So Elon Musk wants to turn a platform probably known as Twitter into a quote unquote super app. So that's why you're seeing new functionalities related to video and streaming and payment services. Payment services are the common element. Financial services are the common element of all these companies that are sort of composing this mosaic or this platform ecosystem, and that they are calling super apps, but they are not super apps because the Chinese model is not replicable. It's really due to Chinese characteristics, the mobile forward, one app for everything. It's not going to be as it's going to be as massive as it is in China. When companies talk about super apps, they sort of mean platform aggregation of a very specific number of types of services. But still, this is problematic, right? Because you're joining different types of business, like food delivery, with financial services, with entertainment, streaming, and you generate more opportunities for data collection. And this is an issue that affects all of these companies across the board. But going back to the point of public versus private companies, in terms of being traded, right, not in terms of being state-owned, we have more information. This information is not necessarily good, but there's more information for these companies than there is for the private companies. So when you look at PedidosYa, you have to think that their G indicator, the governance indicator, was assessed with the Libre here in mind, which is a public company. So we had more information than we had about PedidosYa. We don't have a lot of information about PedidosYa. That's another interesting thing. With iFood, we have more information because they are not in a position that they can be. I mean, PedidosYa is also not, but in Brazil particularly, iFood dominates like 80% of the market. I mean, if you think about Brazil overall, right? But they're focused more on cities that are very large, very big. aiqfome managed to develop because it just focuses on cities that are 300,000 inhabitants or less. So the markets where iFood is not present or where Rappi is not present, and then they can move. So that's another issue that we have. Site structure is a big problem, right? Because we're talking about companies that are present in several jurisdictions. So they have two options. They can either standardize all of their policies, or they can adopt different policies for every region. And this is also one thing that we have opted to do during the process, because we plan to do like a comparison between all the countries, like Mercado Libre in Ecuador, Mercado Libre in Ecuador and Bolivia. But Mercado Libre has standardized policies in a way. There are minor divergences that we talk about in the report, but it would be basically the same score and would not justify the effort. The effort would be justified, however, for Rappi, because Rappi does not do that. Rappi has, for instance, a privacy policy for Colombia that is absolutely terrible. And in comparison, the Brazilian policy is better. That sort of gives you a look into how these companies are thinking about their exposure to risk in terms of compliance. Rappi has calculated that they have a higher risk of receiving fines or being targeted of enforcement, even when the Brazilian Data Protection Authority is just in its initial stages of development, because the legislation has, perhaps in comparison to Colombia's legislation and how Colombia has been enforcing their legislation, risk is higher in Brazil. But Mercado Libre has, for instance, standardized privacy policies according to the Brazilian legislation, which is a decision that is partly due, we can guess, I would guess, because Brazil is responsible for like 50% of Mercado Libre's profits in terms of the marketplace. And the decision, so it's better that we focus on the jurisdictions where we're going to have more problems in terms of just the sheer number of cases or of instances where we could be brought to court, brought to administrative attention. So we're going to focus on that. But Alibaba, also a big company, also present in different jurisdictions. But there's another distinction that we have to draw here for marketplaces. AliExpress operates cross-border. I mean, if you are, for instance, in Colombia, you can import things from AliExpress, but you cannot sell them anymore. You could. No, you could for Shopee. Shopee is also another case that is similar in terms of cross-border versus full-fledged marketplaces. A fully operational marketplace, you have sellers, merchants, and buyers that are within the same jurisdiction and internationally, and they can be on the platform, and you can import and you can sell. But for AliExpress, for instance, only in Brazil you can be a merchant as well. For Shopee, the same as Brazil, or you can be a merchant and you can be a buyer. But for all of the jurisdictions, all of the remaining jurisdictions, you can only import. Shopee tried to expand during the pandemic, both online marketplaces and food delivery services expanded immensely, mostly due to the circumstances of the pandemic itself, but also due to trends that you could observe earlier in the pandemic. So it's sort of received a boost in terms of how they expanded. And Shopee just decided to expand aggressively, and it turned out it would not be profitable, and they just started cutting costs. And they withdrew from Colombia, for example, from Mexico, I think, and they were opening like local operations in several Latin American countries, in Europe as well, and in Asia, and had to exit. India is another issue because there are sanctions to East Asian apps, Chinese mostly, and that was also a factor. But they had to exit. So there is the issue of standardizing these privacy policies, or not standardizing. Mercado Libre is standardized, AliExpress, Alibaba standardizes, and this Rappi does not. And this raises another set of issues regarding of different levels of disclosure that you can find for these companies. And going to a third issue that we found that I think is worthy of attention, and I'm going to be brief here, it's content and readability, right? Presentation matters, content matters, and you can have the documents online, but they can be unfriendly to research and to readers in general. That's the case with DiDi. DiDi is very unfriendly in general in terms of how they present the information. And finding the information was also a challenge. I took like 1 week to actually find DiDi's privacy policies. And in one document, they had a placeholder that said something like, well, please liaise with Billy to insert our privacy policy in this document. So you can get a sense of how they have been approaching that from this specific anecdote. And DiDi also had some problems in terms of the Chinese crackdowns on tech companies. But even before that, the practices were not really good. So this is another specificity of a company that highlights how different problems can pop up when we analyze them. So presentation also, you can see that iFood has scored reasonably well in terms of how understandable their policies are, but they are presented in such a way that there are lots of illustrations. If you want to just extract the text, it's almost impossible. If you are visually impaired, you have an illustration there that has sort of a diagram or even a paragraph of words that are formatted so that they are bigger. And this raises an issue for ourselves as researchers and also for the population in general. So this is just to paint a very broad panorama of challenges that we had. As you can see, the issues just start popping up, and you can just jump from one to the other. So we're trying to highlight some of this complexity with the lengthier report, which is available, I think, but it's still undergoing some revisions because there's a lot of information here that needs to be structured. And I think this is also one of the merits of looking into these companies with RDR's methodology and indicators, because problems just start popping up, and relationships that you would not establish between these companies start to pop up as well. So it's an entire web of problems that are raised just by looking at what these companies make available or not.
Thanks, Pedro. We're running out of time, but I would like to ask you one more question about one urgent action that delivery platforms and marketplaces should implement in order to improve their performance in human rights in the future. Just one.
Just one. Okay. I'll just be very general, right? We're talking about platformization, right? Broadly speaking, so that everyday life, everyday activities are just being brought to platforms. So that means platform work. That means using the services of companies such as Mercado Libre and Mercado Pago to pay for transactions that are not related to their marketplace. And so we're talking about things that raise general problems and very specific problems. So the worker rights in the context of food delivery apps is a specific problem, right? Shares commonalities with other types of informal or precarious work, because we should not confuse these two categories. Informal work is precarious by nature, but precarious work is not necessarily informal. It can be formal. And there are specific solutions that are being talked about across the globe in terms of how we should deal with platform work. And platform work also has specificities according to if you're doing some cloud-based work, it's another set of issues than if you're doing delivery for platforms. So there are targeted solutions, but there are sometimes like just band-aids that you can apply to a wound that is already being cut to given society's skin, metaphorically speaking. And so that's we can do that. And there are several issues that the report raises that we would pinpoint. Enforcement of services, which you can find in the F indicators, is a big issue for delivery workers, right? You need to have some predictability in terms of how the machine operates. So part of doing delivery is doing the work itself, understanding how the platforms work, because it can impact ratings in terms of how I'm evaluated, how many deliveries I get to do daily, how many deliveries I do impacts my income. If I have received a warning for some infraction that I don't even what that infraction was, I run the risk of being deplatformed. If I'm deplatformed in a monopoly, a duopoly market, where it means it's blocked from doing deliveries for that specific segment of the market. So that's a big issue, right? So enforcement of term policies in general, it's a big issue that is operates across the board, but it affects delivery workers in a very specific way. And just to finalize, the platformization in general. So how do you deal with platform governance and antitrust issues as well? Because as platforms aggregate services, they aggregate data, but they also make things more confusing. So how do you determine, for instance, the relevant of an app that is dominant, a single app that is dominant in both financial services and food delivery and entertainment? So there are broader problems that need to be addressed as well.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for your words and for almost 300 pages of report. I would like to remind you, our public, that the links for the full report and the executive summary are in the chat box. And now I'm back to you, Leandro. You mentioned that the RDR methodology could serve as a roadmap for other civil organizations to make reports in the same vein of this one that we are discussing here. But regarding this specific report, how do you expect this type of report may impact the discussion about delivery food platforms and marketplaces relation in the future? The possible outcomes of this report, how could it be replicated?
Yeah, so as we heard from Lucia and Pedro and how they showed, there's still a very long way to go. I think this is a very important milestone, not only for Derechos Digitales, but also for RDR, because this is already creating a baseline about the situation, right? So I think, first of all, this creates an understanding about what's happening, what's the situation, identifying the gaps, and I think now the part of the complex next step is connecting all of those dots. I think Pedro already alluded to a lot of those complexities in understanding how even disclosures between companies are similar or different, but they're all part of the same underlying issue or structural issue in the industry itself. But when we talk about the specific, tech sector or companies behind the same business model, hopefully this will inspire others to learn from this work and adapt it in other regions. As Pedro mentioned, a lot of these companies have presence in a lot of other regions through their parent groups and these often opaque corporate structures owned by investor management groups and so on. So I don't think scrutiny needs to stop here with this local company. So hopefully there are other organizations interested in expanding this in other regions, and we would be more than happy to support those efforts and collaborate. And I think specifically in the case of this report, from the get-go, a lot of the conclusions already point to how companies can learn from each other. Going back to my point about leveraging competitiveness, from what I saw in the conclusions, it seems like companies can learn from themselves, like Mercado Libre about the transparency reports, the example of openness and the public disclosures of aiqfome, and the privacy policy of iFood. So hopefully companies are beginning to pay attention and can spotlight how they can incorporate things into their own workflows, into their own mechanisms to improve. And also related to this is that regulatory pressure is already here. It's not a matter of if, but I guess a matter of when. We're starting to see it in Europe, especially, but I think it's just a matter of when it's going to trickle down, and other countries will eventually, get inspired or start to copy legislation that imposes specific obligations for companies to be more transparent. So ideally, companies who are smart, the appeal in engaging in conversation now. We do know that change is slow and it takes time and persistence. But I think Derechos Digitales with this report is already, has paved the way for how to bring the conversation forward, and really picking apart all of those specific details that Pedro and Lucia mentioned. I think that's going to take probably time and effort, but it's going to raise the bar in terms of how these two very specific industries operate in Latin America, and hopefully with repercussions in other regions.
Yeah, I hope so. Just a little question before we finish. Has any of these companies reached out or contacted you to discuss the results of the report, Lucia?
Hi, yes, we contacted all the companies in order to give them the opportunity to provide us with some feedback about our scores, but only Rappi replied recently, and none of the rest provide any sign of receiving our messages, which is, I don't know, Leandro, but in your experience with RDRs, maybe it's like a pattern, no? When we in civil society perform this type of assessments, it's really weird to really count with their feedback on time.
Okay. I can see the situation there. Well, it's noon here. I would like to thank you all of you, Lucia, Leandro, Pedro, for participating here and for this great conversation. Indeed, we have many more topics to discuss regarding this full report. There's a lot of themes and questions that are pending for another session, maybe. But I would like to thank you and our public for being here, for joining us. if any of you has a closing words or something, this is the time.
I just want to thank everyone again, and congratulations on this first milestone.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
They are thanking your cat too. Okay, thank you very much. See you later.